What if the final words of a condemned man told more truth than the trial itself? Illinois has executed 12 prisoners since 1976, each case steeped in controversy, cruelty, or cold silence. Behind every execution lies a story of pain, justice, and doubt. Join us as we uncover the meals, methods, and haunting last words of the executed. Charles Walker, executed September 12, 1990. How far can desperation push a man? For Charles Walker, desperation and greed drove him to commit murder in one brutal, life-altering moment. It was June 18, 1983, when Walker, in a fit of panic over unpaid bills and a drug addiction spiraling out of control, targeted a young couple, Kevin Paul and Sharon Winker, in Mascoutah, Illinois. Walker knew the victims personally, aware they kept substantial cash at home from their recent wedding gifts. With chilling determination, he entered their house intending to rob them, but confrontation quickly turned violent. Kevin was stabbed repeatedly. Sharon, pleading for mercy, suffered a similar fate. Walker fled with barely enough cash to sustain his addiction for mere days. Police swiftly identified Walker due to the personal nature of the crime. Friends knew about his financial desperation and drug dependency. Evidence gathered at the crime scene led authorities straight to his door. Within a week, Walker was arrested, his confession dripping with remorse, yet unable to explain the brutality fully. His 1984 trial was swift, the jury quickly convinced by overwhelming physical evidence and his recorded confession. Walker's defense pleaded for leniency, citing addiction and mental instability. The jury, however unmoved by such pleas, sentenced him to death. Walker's appeals dragged out nearly 6 years, focusing on questions of inadequate legal representation and procedural missteps, all ultimately failing. On the evening of September 11, 1990, Walker's final meal reflected humble desires: a cheeseburger, fries, and a soda. Shortly before dawn, strapped to the execution gurney, Walker quietly uttered his final words: "I'm sorry for what I've done. May God forgive me." Charles Walker was executed by lethal injection, marking the first execution in Illinois after reinstating the death penalty in 1977. His execution reignited public debates over capital punishment, highlighting questions about justice, mercy, and the price society pays to exact retribution. John Wayne Gacy, executed May 10, 1994. How does an affable clown performing at children's parties become one of America's most notorious serial killers? Beneath the grease paint and floppy shoes lay the darkest impulses of John Wayne Gacy. From 1972 to 1978, Gacy preyed on at least 33 young men and boys, luring them into his Norwood Park Township home under the guise of hospitality or job opportunities. Behind the facade, he turned into a merciless predator, torturing and strangling his victims before burying most beneath the floorboards of his house. The stench of decay eventually drew suspicion. In December 1978, police arrived at Gacy's doorstep, initially to investigate the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Jerome Piest. Detectives sensed something amiss in Gacy's nervous demeanor. A search warrant unveiled horrors unimaginable: decomposing bodies hidden beneath the crawlspace. Gacy's twisted double life unraveled quickly. Dubbed the Killer Clown, his chilling smile became the face of true evil. Gacy's trial in 1980 captured national attention. Despite attempts at an insanity plea, jurors saw past his manipulative charm and convicted him swiftly. Sentenced to death, Gacy spent the next 14 years launching appeals, claiming wrongful convictions and procedural errors. Each appeal, however, ended in rejection, sealing his grim fate. On May 9, 1994, Gacy enjoyed his last meal, a feast including fried chicken, fried shrimp, French fries, and fresh strawberries. Shortly after midnight, he was strapped onto a gurney at Stateville Correctional Center. Before the lethal chemicals entered his bloodstream, Gacy offered his chilling final words, "Kiss my ass." Illinois executed him by lethal injection, a method perceived as more humane compared to electrocution, but no less contentious. Gacy's execution became a pivotal moment in the capital punishment debate, yet nothing overshadowed the shadowy legacy of sorrow left behind by his heinous crimes. Gervase Davis, executed May 17, 1995. How reliable is a confession? This haunting question defined the case of Gervase Davis, whose road to execution was paved with uncertainty. On December 22, 1978, 89-year-old Charles Beeble, a retired farmer, was found brutally murdered in his rural Illinois home. Davis and co-defendant Richard Holman soon became prime suspects. Authorities allege the pair committed a series of robberies and murders across central Illinois. Davis, arrested for unrelated crimes, signed a confession after hours of intense interrogation, claiming later that it was coerced. Prosecutors painted him as a ruthless criminal mastermind. Davis contended he was illiterate, alleging police exploited his vulnerability to extract a confession he could neither read nor understand. Despite Davis' assertions of innocence and coercion, the jury believed prosecutors, sentencing him to death in 1980. Over the following 15 years, his attorneys tirelessly appealed the conviction, emphasizing coerced confession claims, questionable police tactics, and minimal physical evidence linking Davis directly to the murder. Supporters rallied, pleading his case to governors and national media, raising uncomfortable questions about racial injustice in Illinois courts. On his final day, May 16, 1995, Davis chose a modest last meal, fried chicken, collard greens, and apple pie. As he lay restrained, awaiting lethal injection, Davis uttered words that resonated deeply with those questioning his guilt. "I did not commit this crime. I forgive you." Davis was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center, his case fueling widespread debate about wrongful convictions and the irreversible nature of capital punishment. Many today still reflect on Davis's final words, a haunting reminder of the complex interplay between justice, prejudice, and doubt in the American legal system. Raymond Lee Stewart, executed September 18, 1996. Can the roots of violence be traced back to childhood neglect, or are some destined for darkness? Raymond Lee Stewart's tragic journey started with a troubled youth and escalated into a horrifying spree of violence that left 6 dead across Illinois. In January 1981, Stewart embarked on a bloody rampage fueled by paranoia, revenge, and desperation, believing his victims had wronged him. His spree began in Rockford, where he shot and killed 3 people, including store owners Willie Fred and his nephew Albert Pearson, during a botched robbery. Days later, he struck again in Beloit, killing 2 gas station attendants. The mercilessness of his actions terrified the local communities, prompting an urgent manhunt. Stewart's recklessness left clues. Witnesses identified him, and he soon became the most wanted fugitive in the region. Captured in February 1981 in North Carolina after attempting yet another robbery, Stewart confessed to authorities, detailing his cold-blooded actions without remorse. At his 1982 trial, prosecutors portrayed Stewart as calculating and remorseless, while his defense highlighted childhood trauma and mental health struggles. Yet, his crimes spoke louder than any sympathetic plea, and the jury sentenced him swiftly to death. Stewart spent nearly 15 years on death row, appealing his case repeatedly. Each appeal cited issues of racial bias and mental incompetency, but courts continually dismissed these arguments, reinforcing his death sentence. On his final day, September 17, 1996, Stewart chose a simple last meal of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and iced tea. Strapped to the execution gurney at Stateville Correctional Center, his final words offered an apology drenched in regret. "I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. May my death bring peace to those I've hurt." Illinois executed Stewart by lethal injection, a quiet and clinical end to a chaotic life. His case lingered as a stark reminder of the violent depths a human soul can plunge, sparking deeper discussions on the origins of violent behavior and the effectiveness of capital punishment. Walter Stewart, executed November 19, 1997. How does a simple argument escalate to cold-blooded murder? Walter Stewart's descent into violence began on February 10, 1980, in the quiet community of Mount Vernon, Illinois. Stewart confronted his estranged girlfriend, Linda Reeves, and her new boyfriend, Arthur Woods, in a heated exchange over their breakup. Unable to control his jealousy and rage, Stewart pulled out a handgun, shooting both victims multiple times, leaving them dead on the pavement. Witnesses immediately identified Stewart fleeing the scene, prompting a swift police search. Law enforcement located Stewart hiding at a friend's house, visibly shaken and still armed. His arrest was straightforward, as was his chilling confession. During questioning, Stewart detailed how jealousy consumed him, leading him to commit the irreversible act that ended 2 innocent lives. At his trial later that year, Stewart's attorneys attempted to portray him as emotionally unstable, driven by blind passion rather than premeditation. Prosecutors, however, painted a different picture, depicting Stewart as calculating and deliberate. The jury sided overwhelmingly with the prosecution, sentencing him to death. For the next 17 years, Stewart fought tirelessly against his sentence, filing multiple appeals based on claims of ineffective counsel and racial prejudice. Each appeal was systematically rejected, reaffirming the inevitability of his execution. Stewart's final hours on November 18, 1997, passed quietly. His chosen last meal was comfort food: steak, baked potato, salad, and peach cobbler. As the execution drew near, Stewart expressed quiet remorse. His final words reflected regret rather than defiance. "I'm deeply sorry. I hope you all find peace." Executed by lethal injection, Stewart's death was marked by quiet solemnity. His case highlighted not only the tragic consequences of impulsive violence, but also the harsh finality of capital punishment, prompting conversations about justice, forgiveness, and society's capacity for mercy. Andrew Kokorolais, executed March 17, 1999. Could a quiet suburban area become the hunting ground for a horrific killing spree? Andrew Kokorolais and his accomplices, known collectively as the Ripper Crew, unleashed terror across Chicago and its suburbs in the early 1980s. Responsible for a string of grotesque murders, they left behind bodies mutilated in ways that shocked even seasoned detectives. Between 1981 and 1982, the Ripper Crew abducted, tortured, and murdered at least 18 women. Kokorolais was directly implicated in the brutal murder of 21-year-old Lorraine Borowski, who was kidnapped on May 15, 1982, as she opened a real estate office. Her body was discovered weeks later, a grim testament to the group's cruelty. Police cracked the horrifying case through meticulous detective work and testimony from surviving victims who narrowly escaped the crew's grasp. Kokorolais was apprehended in 1982 and, faced with overwhelming evidence, confessed to multiple murders. The brutality described during trial stunned jurors and the nation alike. Despite attempts by his defense to portray him as manipulated by the group's charismatic leader, Robin Gecht, Cocorales was sentenced to death in 1987. Numerous appeals followed, each pleading mitigation due to diminished mental capacity and coercion. Yet, courts consistently denied relief, leaving Cocorales to await execution. His final meal request was sparse: roast chicken, potatoes, and a soda, consumed quietly on the evening of March 16, 1999. Strapped to the gurney, Cocorales spoke briefly. "I pray for forgiveness. I hope everyone hurt by this finds peace." Executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center, Cocorales became the last person executed in Illinois before Governor George Ryan imposed a moratorium on executions. His death reignited debates about capital punishment, specifically focusing on justice for victims versus potential miscarriages of justice. His case remains a chilling reminder of humanity's darkest potential and the ongoing struggle with societal responses to unspeakable evil. Stephen Timothy O'Neill, executed November 16, 1995. What turns an ordinary robbery into a senseless murder? Stephen Timothy O'Neill's path to death row began on December 9, 1983, during what he thought was just another theft to fuel his growing drug addiction. That night, O'Neill and his accomplice targeted a convenience store in East St. Louis, Illinois. Armed and desperate, they burst into the store and demanded money from clerk Carol Jean "Jeannie" Schroeder, a beloved community figure and mother of two. Schroeder complied, handing over cash without resistance. Yet, as the robbers turned to leave, O'Neill inexplicably turned back, firing multiple shots at Schroeder, killing her instantly. The senseless brutality stunned the community and sparked immediate outrage. Surveillance footage and eyewitness testimony quickly identified O'Neill, leading police to his doorstep within days. During his arrest, O'Neill appeared dazed, his mind clouded by drugs. Under interrogation, he confessed in a subdued voice, unable to articulate why he had pulled the trigger. At his trial, the prosecution portrayed him as remorseless and ruthless, while his defense struggled to convey the grip addiction had on his actions. The jury swiftly found him guilty and sentenced him to death in 1984. For more than a decade, O'Neill's appeals argued ineffective counsel, mental incompetency, and the overwhelming influence of his addiction. Courts rejected these arguments repeatedly, solidifying his execution date. As his final day arrived, O'Neill requested a humble meal of cheeseburgers, French fries, a Coke, and chocolate cake. Strapped to the execution table on November 16, 1995, O'Neill's final words were faint but filled with genuine remorse. "To Jeannie's family, I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused. May you find peace." Illinois executed him by lethal injection, closing a tragic chapter marked by drug-fueled violence and senseless loss. Anthony Porter, execution date, September 23, 1998. How certain must justice be to justify an execution? Anthony Porter's case became one of Illinois' most controversial death penalty cases. Convicted in 1983 for the double murder of Jerry Hillard and Marilyn Green in Chicago's Washington Park, Porter's execution drew national attention due to profound doubts surrounding his guilt. Porter was identified by eyewitnesses as the gunman, leading to his conviction and subsequent death sentence. Yet, lingering doubts remained, amplified by claims of Porter's intellectual disability and mental competency issues. For years, Porter's appeals argued misidentification, inadequate counsel, and investigative negligence. Repeated appeals failed until just 2 days before his execution in September 1998. At the 11th hour, Northwestern University journalism students uncovered evidence suggesting Porter was innocent. The students identified another man, All-Story Simon, who confessed on videotape to the murders. Illinois Supreme Court halted Porter's execution mere hours before the scheduled injection. Though Porter narrowly escaped death, his case profoundly impacted Illinois' legal system, eventually contributing to the moratorium on executions announced by Governor George Ryan. Porter's brush with death starkly demonstrated the terrifying margin for error in capital punishment. Manuel Salazar. Execution date, May 15, 1996. What happens when self-defense crosses the line into murder? Manuel Salazar's life changed dramatically on September 12, 1984, when he shot and killed Joliet police officer Martin Murren. Salazar, then 18, claimed he acted purely in self-defense after Officer Murren allegedly attacked him during a routine confrontation. The state painted Salazar as a cop killer, inciting outrage and quickly securing a death sentence. Supporters argued passionately that Salazar had acted in panic, genuinely fearing for his life, claiming the officer aggressively targeted the teenager without provocation. Over a decade of intense appeals followed, challenging racial prejudice, procedural errors, and the fairness of his trial. Just days before Salazar's scheduled execution, the Illinois Supreme Court intervened, overturning his death sentence due to procedural mistakes and granting him a new trial. Eventually resentenced to life imprisonment, Salazar narrowly avoided execution, fueling intense discussions about justice, racial profiling, and self-defense laws in Illinois. Cornelius Lewis, execution date, October 18, 1999. Can the complexity of a case undermine confidence in a death sentence? Cornelius Lewis was sentenced to death in 1988 for the murder of a security guard during a robbery gone wrong in Belleville, Illinois. Lewis maintained his innocence, claiming he was merely present but not responsible for the fatal shot fired by his accomplice. Despite vehement denials and questions about the reliability of witnesses, Lewis faced execution. Persistent advocacy by legal teams eventually revealed significant flaws in the original trial, including unreliable eyewitness testimonies and potential prosecutorial misconduct. In October 1999, the Illinois Supreme Court stayed Lewis's execution indefinitely, acknowledging the troubling uncertainties surrounding his guilt. Lewis's case, among others, fueled Governor Ryan's decision to impose a moratorium on executions, becoming a potent symbol of flaws within the capital punishment system. Ronald Kitchen. Execution date, June 2002. What happens when police brutality contaminates justice? Ronald Kitchen spent over a decade on death row for a double murder in Chicago, convicted based largely on a coerced confession obtained through physical abuse by detectives under the infamous John Burge. Kitchen repeatedly asserted his innocence, his case gaining momentum through investigative journalism and advocacy. Evidence eventually surfaced showing detectives fabricated and coerced confessions from multiple suspects, casting grave doubts on Kitchen's guilt. In 2009, he was exonerated and released from prison, escaping execution narrowly. Kitchen's near-death ordeal spotlighted systemic abuses within Chicago police practices, further deepening public skepticism about capital punishment. Madison Hobley. Execution date, January 2003. Can a wrongful conviction ever be fully undone? Madison Hobley was sentenced to death for allegedly setting a fire that killed 7 people, including his wife and child, in 1987. Convicted, based primarily on a dubious confession and testimony from compromised witnesses, Hobley maintained his innocence, claiming police coercion and fabrication. After relentless advocacy and investigative reporting uncovered glaring inconsistencies and suppressed evidence, Hobley's death sentence was overturned by Governor Ryan's mass clemency in January 2003, just days before his scheduled execution. Hobley's case underscored profound injustices and errors within Illinois' capital punishment system, playing a crucial role in the state's eventual abolition of the death penalty. These 12 executions in Illinois reveal not just the faces of the condemned, but the cracks in a justice system that sometimes falters. Some offered remorse, others defiance. A few may have been innocent. Their final meals and words remain frozen in time, echoes from the edge of life and law.